came to the Philippines, our ancestors have already been trading with countries like China, Japan, India, Siam, Borneo, and the Moluccas. The Spanish government continued trading relations with these countries, and soon Manila became the center of commerce in the east. But then merchants from Cadiz and Seville in Spain soon felt threatened because Manila became their major competitor. They feared that the Chinese goods coming from Manila will flood the foreign markets and drown out Spanish goods due to lower prices. That is why in 1593, restrictions were imposed on the flow of commerce to and from Manila. The Spaniards closed all the ports of Manila to all the countries except Mexico. That is why there is what we call the Manila-Acapulco trade, also known as the galleon trade. The galleon trade was a government monopoly. Only 2 galleons were used, and one sailed from Acapulco to Manila with some 500,000 pesos worth of goods, spending 120 days at sea, while the other was from Manila to Acapulco with some 250,000 pesos worth of goods, spending 90 days at sea. The government supervised its participation in the galleon trade by means of tickets called as boletas, and these tickets were only given to selected people, just like the Governor General, the friars, the members of the Royal Audiencia, the widows, and the friends of Spanish officials. And these people bought goods from Filipino merchants to be sold in Mexico and purchased merchandise from the incoming galleon to be sold in Manila at high prices. Aside from serving as a bridge of commerce between the Philippines and Mexico, the galleon trade enabled the colonial government to raise much-needed revenues. It also allowed modern liberal ideas to enter the country, eventually inspiring the movement for independence from Spain. And because the Spaniards were so engrossed in making profits from the galleon trade, they hardly had any time to further exploit our natural resources. The ill effects of the galleon trade, however, outweighed its benefits. Local officials spent most of their time buying and selling products from the galleon, thus neglecting agriculture and other industries. Provincial folk were enticed to migrate to Manila in hopes of benefiting from the galleon trade. Thus, countryside development was forgotten. Only a few influential people profited from the galleon trade at the expense of the colony's economic development. Worse, it became such a source of graft and corruption that the king finally abolished it on September 25, 1813. The Obras Pias were foundations run by religious orders that invested money in trade and used their profits for charitable works. They were said to be the forerunners of banks in the country. The first was established in 1594 under the name Humanidad de la Misericordia. The Obras Pias received funds from wealthy Filipinos who wished to contribute to worthy causes like the building of hospitals, the education of orphans, and the care of the poor and disabled. But first, the friars used these funds for money-lending activities to let it earn interest. The Obras Pias grew in number at the height of the galleon trade. Their success in business made the religious orders very wealthy and enabled them to control the development of banks in the country. However, the Obras Pias soon became bankrupt because a big number of its borrowers, many of whom lost money from galleons that sank in the sea, eventually failed to pay their debts. Filipino farmers and traders finally had a taste of prosperity when Governor General Jose Basco y Vargas instituted reforms intended to free the economy from its dependence on Chinese and Mexican trade. Basco implemented a general economic plan aimed at making the Philippines self-sufficient. He established the Economic Society of Friends of the Country, which gave incentives to farmers for planting cotton, spices, and sugarcane, encouraged miners to extract gold, silver, tin, and copper, and rewarded investors for scientific discoveries they made. He also issued directives regarding new methods and equipment used in farming. Tobacco monopoly. The tobacco industry was placed under government control during the administration of Governor General Basco. A tobacco monopoly was implemented in the Cagayan Valley, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, La Union, Isabela, Abra, Nueva Ecija, and Marinduque in 1781. Each of these provinces planted nothing but tobacco and sold their harvest only to the government at a pre-designated price, leaving nothing for the farmers. No other province was allowed to plant tobacco. The government exported the tobacco to other countries and also sent part of it to the cigarette factories in Manila. The tobacco monopoly successfully raised revenues for the colonial government and made Philippine tobacco famous all over Asia.
During the early years of Spanish colonization, education was mostly religion-oriented and controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. Spanish friars and missionaries educated the natives through religion with the aim of converting indigenous populations to the Catholic faith. Upon their arrival, their main goals were to govern the islands, obtain a foothold in the spice trade, and to convert indigenous populations to the Catholic faith. King Philip II's Leyes de Indias mandated Spanish authorities in the Philippines to educate the natives, to teach them how to read and write, and to learn Spanish. Spanish friars argued that it would be easier for them to learn the local languages first than trying to teach Spanish to all the population. These missionaries emphasized the teachings of the Catholic religion starting from the primary level to the tertiary level of education. The students in the primary level were taught the Christian doctrines, the reading of Spanish books, and a title of the native's language. Aside from the Christian doctrines taught, Latin was also taught to the students instead of Spanish. The Augustinians opened a school immediately upon arriving in Cebu in 1565. This was the first established school in the Philippines. The Franciscans, on the other hand, taught locals on industrial and agricultural techniques. They arrived on 1577. Other schools established by Jesuits include Colegio de San Ignacio, which was in Manila on 1590. By the second half of the 17th century, this university was incorporated as a mere College of Medicine and Pharmacy into the University of Santo Tomas. The second one was the Colegio de San Ildefonso, which was established in Cebu on 1595. However, on 1769, this was closed down due to the Jesuit expulsion from the Philippines, but this was reopened on 1783. Education in the Philippines has undergone several stages of development, from the pre-Spanish era to the present. During this period, education was inadequate, controlled, and suppressed. With the coming of the Spaniards, missionary teachers replaced tribunal tutors, which is why church and school go together. They had planned this educational policy from the very beginning. One of their missions, in addition to economic exploitation, was to convert the pagans into the Christian faith. Education was only compelled to the friars' influences. These learnings basically includes all their learnings from the Christian doctrines. These learnings accumulated into what is now the newly acquired knowledge of its Filipino students. Through this technique, however, the friars were enabled to effectively evangelize the Catholic tradition in the Philippines.
Spain established a centralized colonial government in the Philippines that was composed of the national government and the local government, which administered the provinces, cities, towns, and municipalities. With the help of the local government, the national government was able to maintain peace and order, collect taxes, and build schools and other public works. As the king's representative and the highest-ranking official in the Philippines, the Governor-General saw to it that royal decrees and laws emanating from Spain were implemented in the Philippines. He had the power to appoint and dismiss public officials, except those personally chosen by the king. He also supervised all government offices and the collection of taxes. The Governor-General exercised certain legislative powers as well. He issued proclamations to facilitate the implementation of laws. He could also stop royal decrees from being carried out if he thought that conditions in the colony did not warrant their implementation. Until 1861, the Governor-General headed the Royal Audiencia, the highest judicial court in the Philippines. As such, he had the power to decide on what punishment to give criminals, as well as grant amnesty to deserving convicts. The Governor-General also performed as Captain General. He was the Commander-in-Chief of Spain's military forces in the Philippines. The Spanish colonization in the Philippines was completed in just a little more than 10 years. The practices that Spain applied towards the Sen were a big factor in the speedy establishment of her authority in the country. Some of the schemes that were included are the encomienda system, taxation, polo, and bandala. The Spaniards created local government units to facilitate the country's administration. There were two types of local government units, the alcaldía and the corregimiento. The alcaldía, led by the alcalde mayor, governed the provinces that had been fully subjugated. The corregimiento, headed by the corregidor, governed the provinces that were not yet entirely under the Spanish control. The municipal government. Each province was divided into several towns or pueblos headed by gobernadorcillos, whose main concerns were efficient governance and tax collection. 4 lieutenants aided the gobernadorcillo: the tenente mayor or chief lieutenant, the teniente de policía, police lieutenant, the teniente de cementeras, lieutenant of the fields, and the teniente de ganados, lieutenant of the livestock.
To colonize the Filipinos with ease, the Spaniards used the divide and conquer strategy. The lack of centralized government and the fragmentation of the Filipinos into many barangays meant the Spaniards did not have to fight one big army, but only small troops of warriors. They taught the art of battle to natives of friendly barangays, and they enlisted their help in subduing their hostile countrymen. Thus, the small number of Spanish troops did not become a hindrance into their conquest of the entire nation.